mountains tremble as the waters surge. A river brings joy to the city. The sacred home Most High. God himself lives in that city. Cannot be destroyed. Protected at the break of day. The nations are in an uproar, and kingdoms crumble, world threaten, and the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Come, see the glorious works of the Lord. See how he brings destruction upon the world and cause wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear in two. He burns the shields with fire. Be silent and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. The Lord Almighty is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever. Good morning again, honorable members. Honorable members, when the business of this House ended yesterday evening, the honorable member for Hawksville will reserve the floor for member for Seabreeze. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to the members of this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, I wish to begin my contribution to this 2020-2021 budget debate by giving thanks to the Almighty God for granting me another year to stand here to represent the constituents of Seabreeze and to make my contribution to this debate. It has been a pleasure and privilege to serve the people of Seabreeze, and I am immensely grateful to stand here on their behalf and to receive their continued support to speak as their voice in these hallowed chambers. Mr. Speaker, I also wish to thank the good member for Kalani, the Most Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis, for continuing to repose confidence in me to serve as a member of his cabinet with responsibility for the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. I remain persuaded that he and I and every member elected have been handpicked to serve for a time such as this. Mr. Speaker, on the way here, a song sort of resonated with me as I reflect on all that has transpired within the last few months concerning both Dorian and now COVID. And that songwriter said, millions did not make it, but I am one of the ones who did. Mr. Speaker, it could have been worse. Many countries did not make it the way we did. We are one of the countries who did. Mr. Speaker, by evidence of this book, the draft estimates of revenue and expenditure, it shows and it demonstrates the accountability of this government in accordance, Mr. Speaker, with our obligations under this document, the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, by evidence of us being here today, amidst the threat of COVID-19, Mr. Speaker, it shows our unwavering commitment to be transparent, to be accountable, and to continue our work for the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, Notwithstanding the executive emergency orders, the executive and all elected members together with the list of essential workers remained on the front line and on behalf of our people. We continued to work. We were elected to serve, Mr. Speaker, and we realized as a responsible government, we ought to do this in good times and in bad times. Mr. Speaker, while considering and recognizing essential workers, I want to recognize the work of the church. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say early on, thank you to the church that continues to pray for this government and yea, for this people, that no matter what challenges confront us, we will come out stronger and more resilient as a people. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding these grave circumstances, we are here to debate the best way forward for our children, for our youth, and for our future. I must commend the courageous efforts, Mr. Speaker, of this body and say to them that history would be gracious in telling our story. Mr. Speaker, I think the record is clear. I believe the record is true that no other government in the history of the Bahamas would have directly impacted and invested in the lives of Bahamians as this government did. And Mr. Speaker, to be fair, no other government in the history of the Bahamas had to deal with such a devastating, catastrophic event as Hurricane Dorian and now COVID. Mr. Speaker, I said last year during the budget communication, and I will say again, budgeting is more than the numbers. It is about projections, and it's more than about projections and analysis. But it is a complex task of prioritizing and analyzing quantitative and qualitative data and balancing these facts with the tangible needs of the people. Mr. Speaker, everything the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture does is directly to the benefit of people, the Bahamian people, more than any. And so I've dubbed it the People's Ministry. Mr. Speaker, I am here to declare that we are debating an unprecedented budget for unprecedented time. This budget is for the people. Mr. Speaker, the late Pastor Theodore Parker, a theologian and abolitionist, is quoted as having said, "A democracy is a government of all the people, by the people, for the people." Mr. Speaker, with respect to Hurricane Dorian, it's very important that we understand and we put in context where we came from, what we've been impacted by, and why this budget is unprecedented, and we describe it as unprecedented time. So Hurricane Dorian, 2nd and 3rd of September it came. Mr. Speaker, claiming the lives of more than 300 people, including men, women, and children. And that number is also among those missing, and it speaks to those that are reported dead. It has left thousands homeless, mentally and psychologically starved, and an innumerable measure of physical damage beyond our most dreaded nightmare, Mr. Speaker, with Abaco and Grand Bahama feeling the brunt of this pain. Mr. Speaker, it left hundreds of people displaced, and the government of the Bahamas moved swiftly to evacuate hundreds of our people from our island. We established long-term shelter housing arrangements, secured mass, food provision, and clothing distribution, Mr. Speaker, through our collective effort. Because we're all in this together, Mr. Speaker. We searched, we rescued, we sheltered, and we are still healing. And this budget exercise, Mr. Speaker, further facilitates our national effort of restoration. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, and the numbers are, that the government assumed the cost to house and provide for more than 1,500 evacuees in the capital. Mr. Speaker, permit me to extend thank you to the minister and his team at the Ministry and Department of Social Services, led by Director Lillian Plum-Ford, for their excellent work in this regard. Our nation will forever owe social workers a debt of gratitude for their invaluable service. Mr. Speaker, the fact is, the numbers are, Hurricane Dorian hit our economy hard. Can't put it no other way than that. We have been hit hard. The financial loss approximately was estimated or has been estimated at approximately $3.4 billion. One hurricane within one fiscal period, within 12 months, Mr. Speaker. Amidst that, there was no cut of the civil service. These are the facts, and these are the numbers. Mr. Speaker, not forgetting the exorbitant cost to restore now basic infrastructure of the affected island. Mr. Speaker, for a small island nation to still stand after such an ordeal, it speaks volumes to our resilience. And it speaks to the unprecedented leadership we have in these unprecedented times. And yes, Mr. Speaker, this is an unprecedented budget. It follows, but it is and remains a budget for the people. Mr. Speaker, if Hurricane Dorian was not enough in terms of damage, in terms of financial loss, in terms of impact, if that was not enough, only 5 months later, the world was stricken with the effects of what we now know as COVID-19, the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, after showing its head in Wuhan, China, in a short space of time, it reached our shores on the 15th of March, 2020, reportedly, prompting an immediate shutdown of the state by way of an emergency proclamation issued by His Excellency, the Governor General. And a resolution was followed in the House. Mr. Speaker, please allow me to extend, in these circumstances, in these unprecedented times, my heartfelt condolences to those who would have suffered to the wrath of Dorian and now COVID. Mr. Speaker, we expect hurricanes, but none could have predicted Dorian. Mr. Speaker, we are aware of viruses and their potential to spread, but the world remains shocked, having experienced the wrath of COVID. Novel, different, new, it's unusual. We say it's unprecedented. Mr. Speaker, and therefore, this makes our economic circumstances, this COVID more than anything, it makes our economic circumstances volatile. Mr. Speaker, we are all uncomfortable every day in a COVID environment, Mr. Speaker, and we are all praying for the best. And today we are here to do our best to manage under these unprecedented, unusual, uncomfortable circumstances. We are where we are, Mr. Speaker, and it is what it is. Mr. Speaker, as a result of COVID, 6,091,000 people to date have been infected, and over 400,000, Mr. Speaker, have died. Mr. Speaker, as we yet debate, our nation remains in survival mode under the Emergency Powers Order, and members of Parliament are all here assuming the risk for those we vow to serve. Mr. Speaker, the reality is the Dorian and COVID phenomena, coupled with Hurricane Irma and the state of Akuma. The state of Akuma, we found ourselves in upon assuming office in 2017. Mr. Speaker, resulted in what I call a national economic challenge. On a broader scale, Mr. Speaker, The world describes this state as a worldwide crisis. Mr. Speaker, our islands are not immune to the effects of this crisis, and thus we must find the best way to survive and to rebound. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance and his team, led by the good Financial Secretary, have done just that.
Just a moment. You can mark your spot. Apparently we are having technical difficulties. Again, Honorable Member, the Chair recognizes Honorable Member for Bamboo Down.
Mr. Speaker, if we are having some technical difficulties, then I do move that the House dispense for about 10 minutes until we're able to work out these issues. As we've been plagued with these issues throughout this budget debate, I look forward to this being the very last time that we actually will have this kind of circumstance in the House of Senate. So I do move that the House suspends for about 10 minutes.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend for approximately 10 minutes. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended for approximately 10 minutes. Thank you, honorable members. It appears as if we have resolved the technical issue that we experienced, and we can now proceed. Chair recognizes the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the suspension, I thought it very important or essential to preface my substantive remarks in accounting for the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture by laying a foundation and putting into context, Mr. Speaker, the unprecedented times we find ourselves in, Mr. Speaker. These unprecedented times marked by a Category 5 Hurricane Dorian and further marked by the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker, causes us to have to implement unprecedented measures. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are here today to lay before this House an unprecedented budget to account for and inconsistent with these unprecedented times. Mr. Speaker, such times have posed for us an unprecedented challenge. But my declaration here today is the fact that this is yet the people's budget. This budget is still one for the people. Mr. Speaker, our nation remains in survival mode. Under the Emergency Powers Order, members of Parliament are all here assuming the risk for those we vow to serve. Mr. Speaker, reality is the Dorian and COVID phenomena, coupled with Hurricane Irma and the state of a coma we found ourselves in upon assuming office in 2017, resulted in what may be described as a national economic challenge. On a broader scale, Mr. Speaker, the world describes this state as a world economic crisis. Mr. Speaker, our islands are not immune to the effects of the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, and thus we must find the best way to survive and to rebound. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and his team, led by the good Financial Secretary, are doing just that. They are finding the way for us to rebound by means of this unprecedented budget for unprecedented times. Mr. Speaker, our economy suffered a gigantic loss as a result of COVID. Our tourist sector was hard hit. Our number one industry shut down. And the country was made to survive, I say, on drift for approximately 6 consecutive weeks as we worked together to stay home, to stay safe. Mr. Speaker, now is the time we must encourage the Minister of Tourism that he and his team and the members of the tourism sector, or the stakeholders of the tourism sector, can and must rebound, and rebound with the help of the Almighty God we will. As a member of the government, I am thankful, Mr. Speaker, to the good Lord for sparing the lives of thousands of Bahamians during the spread of COVID. With 11 deaths and 103 infections, Mr. Speaker, I am yet concerned that the majority of those infections are females. We all know it could have been worse. I take this time to extend my condolences to the families and victims of the COVID-19 virus. In particular, Mr. Speaker, what a coincidence, my colleague, who now sits beside me, good member from Yamakroa, who would have unfortunately suffered the loss of his dear sister. Indeed, we are praying for you and your family. Mr. Speaker, in similar fashion as we did with Dorian, this government, in response to the challenges faced by COVID-19, executed an unemployment benefit plan, a stimulus package, Mr. Speaker, to the tune of $10 million for the direct benefit of people, many of whom, Mr. Speaker, are of our youth demographic and our tourism and creative arts sector, such as our straw vendors, again, the majority of whom are females. Mr. Speaker, as a result of COVID, it is being forecasted that the Bahamian economy will suffer a 16% or nearly $2 billion contraction in GDP during 2020. Mr. Speaker, all of this has happened so soon, so fast, Mr. Speaker, in an unprecedented fashion. We could not and we cannot come here to lay anything else but an unprecedented budget for unprecedented times. Mr. Speaker, I dare to repeat the fact that it could have been worse. I would like to join the many organizations who partnered with the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture to extend and prepare thank you videos or publish thank you videos to the frontline and for the frontline COVID-19 fighters, including the medical community, members of the armed forces, and all essential workers, including and specifically the church, who prayed, who gave, who sacrificed, and helped us maintain some sense of normalcy during a most difficult period. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, I wish we had more funds for youth programs, more funds for sports development, and more funds for cultural upliftment. Mr. Speaker, I wish COVID-19 and Hurricane Dorian did not happen. Mr. Speaker, because one life lost was one life too many. But Mr. Speaker, it did. And we are where we are. And unfortunately, yet fortunately, it is what it is. I find it fitting, Mr. Speaker, to repeat here the prayer when we consider these times of Ronald Niebuhr, who wrote, and I quote, "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." Mr. Speaker, prior to this administration coming into office 3 short years ago, the Bahamian people suffered from what I consider 5 years of neglect, 5 years of incompetence, 5 years of a culture of accountability, unaccountability, and unacceptable level of indiscipline. Mr. Speaker, it is what it is, and we are where we are. It is now the people's time, and we have moved on from that depressed story of a PLP administration. But we will not forget, Mr. Speaker, we cannot forget that we found the cupboard empty. We cannot forget that the cookie jar was missing. We cannot forget that we found the people, the nation, our economy in a state of a coma. Mr. Speaker, while we have introduced the phased reopening for the benefit of the economy, I dare say we cannot ignore the fact that COVID-19 or the COVID-19 monster remains at large, and therefore we must proceed with caution. Mr. Speaker, time waits on no man or woman for that matter, and today we are here once again at the beginning of a long hurricane season that is, according to the meteorologists, expected to be an overactive season. What is even more concerning, Mr. Speaker, is that our country is positioned in a hurricane belt, and therefore our chances of experiencing a storm is significantly high. Mr. Speaker, I will join the chorus of those who sang, notwithstanding these challenges that we face, and those that threaten our doors. I don't believe he brought us this far to leave us. Mr. Speaker, these are unprecedented times, and so we are here with an unprecedented budget. But Mr. Speaker, it is a budget for the people. Mr. Speaker, our economic outlook before COVID, and these truths and these realities are important to put in context, Mr. Speaker, our appreciation for the work that this government, this Ministry of Finance have done, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we keep our head above water. Prior to Dorian and COVID, we had no downgrades. Our debt to GDP had increased, Mr. Speaker, by 59.2%. And we anticipated a growth of 1.2% for the year 2019-2020. Standards and Poor's maintained this nation's credit worthiness at a BB plus B. Mr. Speaker, we were on our way. These are the records, and these are important facts, Mr. Speaker. Had we maintained the downward trajectory that plagued the former administration, someone said on East Street, dog would eat our lunch. But it is because of this financial stability founded under the leadership of the good member for Kalani, Prime Minister, and established by his Deputy Prime Minister and the team, Mr. Speaker, at the Ministry of Finance and all the government members working together, Mr. Speaker, that prior to Dorian and COVID, as they say around the corner, our face was good, South and Central. Our face was good. And we can live today to see another day, and we can live to implement another plan, Mr. Speaker, for the foundation laid in 3 short years by this outstanding Free National Movement, Minister-led government. Mr. Speaker, and for this foundation, for this hard work of this government, we give God thanks. Mr. Speaker, not only are these successes demonstrative of this government's plan, but a plan that was working and a government that continued to act responsibly and live up to our word to restore our economy and our people. Mr. Speaker, we were on our way to growth. All would agree, 1.2%. Mr. Speaker, GDP had increased 59.2%. Mr. Speaker, it is evident. We have to go with what is before us. The truths, the realities, we were on our way. The reputational damage we suffered, in my view, ought to be laid, Mr. Speaker, before coming here. Before 2017, the 10th of May, the reputational damage we suffered, in my view, ought to be laid and remain solely at the feet of the former PLP administration, whose failed governance model was evidenced by a yearly downward trajectory of downgrade after downgrade. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people came off that train on the 10th of May, 2017, because we all saw the truth and the reality that the ship was destroying our past and threatening our very future. Mr. Speaker, I said it before on behalf of the good people of Seabreeze, and I will say it again to make it abundantly clear. We are not going back. We have made a commitment to move our communities, our country, and our people forward, upward, onward, together. And this budget, Mr. Speaker, is for the people and will assist us in continuing to do just that. Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves in a new environment post-COVID. We look around this chamber. The furniture has changed. The distance between us, Mr. Speaker, has been adjusted. And save for the members of the media, we have no visitors in the gallery. Mr. Speaker, of the 290 years of our parliamentary government's existence, this is an unusual and unprecedented environment. And we all have to adjust. And this means it cannot be business as usual. And anyone, Mr. Speaker, who is advocating for the same benefit under hardship conditions is simply seeking to cause political mischief. They're being unreasonable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Culture, permit me to reinforce the tone of this budget debate 2020-2021 as first announced by the good member for East Grand Bahama, Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister, who said, and I quote, "This is an unprecedented budget for unprecedented times." And to this, Mr. Speaker, allow me to further posit that this is still the people's time, this remains the people's budget, and this 2020-2021 budget is for the people. Mr. Speaker, the People's Ministry, or the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture, understands that the role and mandate of our ministry is to lead in shaping the nation's youth ideology, sporting methodology, and cultural philosophy. Significantly, we recognize that we must do this with a great degree of adaptability in these ever-changing times. Mr. Speaker, adaptation, or the ability to change in response to one's environment, is one of the greatest characteristics of a human being. Mr. Speaker, how we come out of these experiences, or whether we allow them to propel us forward or hold us back, I believe will be determined by the extent of our ability to adapt. Mr. Speaker, one Charles Darwin is quoted as having said, "The most powerful natural species are those that adapt to environmental change without losing their fundamental identity, which gives them their competitive advantage." Mr. Speaker, this budget for the people is designed to ensure that we adapt to the new conditions in which we must operate, while maintaining a stable national outlook and preserving our competitive advantage in the banking and tourism sectors, two pillars of our sovereignty and national identity. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture is budgeted at $18,938,186. This figure represents a reduction of some $5,140,194, or 21% budget cut, in line with the agreed fiscal austerity measures. This simply means, Mr. Speaker, given the changing circumstances and limited financial resources, a portion of the ministry's funds had to be reallocated. Mr. Speaker, these are unprecedented times. And so this cut ensures that in the given circumstances, there are adequate provisions to help with public health expenses, social safety net programs, job creation and sustenance, food security initiatives, and tourism rejuvenation. Mr. Speaker, we cannot forget. What we cannot forget is that we are all in this together, and all food comes from one pot, and every man, woman, boy, and girl, rich or poor, have to eat. Mr. Speaker, lots of what goes into the budget preparation, management, and application. It's a lot of work. And I would like to briefly pause to acknowledge the hardworking management and staff, the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture, Mr. Speaker, supervised my permanent secretary, Mr. Eugene Poitier, who diligently facilitate programs, services, and initiatives that support the youth, sports, and cultural sector. I thank our partners for their appreciation, Mr. Speaker, of the fact that these are challenging times and thus an unprecedented budget. Mr. Speaker, where possible, most budget items, with the exception of personal emoluments, suffered a reduction to bring our ministry in compliance with the required overall 20% cut. Mr. Speaker, what this means was that our aim was to ensure all persons who had jobs and benefits prior to COVID-19 maintained their status or remuneration, maintained their benefit. Mr. Speaker, maintaining the livelihood of Bahamians was and remains the priority of this government. With personal emoluments not being included in the budget cut, some items in accordance with actual expenditure carried, of course, a greater deduction than others. It is to be noted, however, that no critical area went empty. The ministry has dedicated itself, Mr. Speaker, to adapting while maintaining the quality of services, programs, and facilitation our ministry offers. And we are thankful to the Ministry of Finance for their cooperation in this regard. Mr. Speaker, from the onset of COVID-19, my ministry has been in adaptation mode. We launched our online activity platform on the 23rd of March 2020, 1 week after the shutdown. This platform provided weekly motivational stay at home, stay active, and stay engaged challenges with youth, sports, and cultural components. These videos and messages inspired hundreds of other postings of challenges and online engagements by other civic organizations, families, and friends. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure who all were a part of it, but I saw, Mr. Speaker, a carrot challenge. My family and I, we had the pancake challenge. We baked the baked bread challenge. And we were on Zoom, and they really could not taste how wonderful the bread was. So, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, I did not win any of the challenges. But, Mr. Speaker, I learned a lot, suffice it to say. These are the kind of things, Mr. Speaker, sports videos, youth challenges, Mr. Speaker, dance videos. These are the things we did to stay positively engaged as we stayed home and complied with the orders to stay safe. Mr. Speaker, we also used the available electronic medium to stay connected with our ministry partners while monitoring a daily COVID-19 hotline to the benefit of the general public. Today, in accordance with public service policy, the ministry staff has returned to work, albeit on a rotation basis, with our office opening only for those urgent matters between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m., Monday through Friday, having commenced on the 13th of May 2020. Mr. Speaker, to highlight the major areas of the budget, the following reflects an estimated breakdown of the draft budget allocation for department, section, and offices within the ministry. One important fact to be noted, Mr. Speaker, about the ministry's budget allocation is that though the ministry has suffered necessary deductions, the differences are not below actual expenditure. In other words, expenses are in accordance with or below the approved budget estimates for last budget cycle. This means, for example, Mr. Speaker, athlete subvention was approved at $1,346,150 last budget period. This actual expenditure under that item for the budget period was $1,007,588 as per the date of the 2020-2021 budget publication. A difference then of $338,562 was not spent based on the date of this record. This position, Mr. Speaker, would inform any reasonable adjustment or rationale for new budgetary spending. I hasten to add, for the benefit of our athletes, of whom we continue to be immensely proud, that in accordance with the existing sports policy, no active athlete approved for subvention would be affected by the items adjusted. However, where an athlete is not performing in accordance with standard policy, the usual adjustments will be applied as recommended by the Department of Sports and our standard consultation with the respective federations, sporting bodies. Mr. Speaker, that being said, what I call, Mr. Speaker, we have the evidence to show. And I'll start off, Mr. Speaker, with the funds allocated for the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture. Mr. Speaker, it's all here. The evidence is here as to what we receive, what we will be doing. And so, Mr. Speaker, we came in at over $18 million, Mr. Speaker, and of that $18 million, we plan to spend 12.14% on ministry general programs, about 28% on personal emoluments, 8% the youth department, sports 15%, culture 10%, Operational expenses, 27%. And Mr. Speaker, this ministry is under one budget head. So it means, Mr. Speaker, we share and share alike to ensure that we maintain the quantity and quality of our programming. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget for the people, understanding that we are in unprecedented times and therefore we are required as a responsible government to take unprecedented measures. This budget, while taking into account, Mr. Speaker, I want to divert a moment. Mr. Speaker, to indicate before I go into all of youth sports and culture and what they do, and we're going to show you plainly, Mr. Speaker, I am the kind of mother, I have 3 children, and it's just a coincidence that I have 3 areas under my portfolio, youth sports and culture. I'm the kind of mother that loves them all equally. So whenever you hear, or anyone hears that the minister doesn't like sports, or the minister doesn't like youth, or the minister doesn't like culture, Mr. Speaker, I hardly answer those things because it's a non-issue. Mr. Speaker, it's pure rhetoric, propaganda, innuendos, and simply, Mr. Speaker, it has no place in a post-modern Bahamian society. I have been placed here to ensure the development equally of youth, equally of sports, equally of culture, and I am sorry, I'm just not the type of mother that have favorites. They're all going to share and share alike. So, Mr. Speaker, this budget, while taking into account the unprecedented times in which we all find ourselves, have charted a course that will allow us to work together to overcome the challenges of Hurricane Dorian and COVID. Towards this end, this F&M government, led by the Honorable Dr. Minnis, is leaving no one behind. We have made the provisions for our youth programs to continue, albeit under new conditions, for our athletes to continue receiving assistance for their training and development. We have secured the subsidy for the benefit of cultural community in anticipation of, among other events, the end-of-year beloved Junkanoo celebrations. We have maintained provisions for our partners to receive their annual financing, albeit at a 20% deduction as mandated. And we have done this while leaving room to facilitate initiatives designed to invest in and strengthen the youth industry, our sports sector, and the orange economy, better known as the creative arts industry. Mr. Speaker, in an unprecedented time, we find ourselves in an unusual environment, applying extraordinary measures, but all for the benefit and betterment for the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, when it is all said and done, Bahamians will see beyond the noise and the rhetoric. They will know, as I know, as you know. Somebody says, when the dust settles, and every member in here, in this honorable house, knows and would agree that this government is not and cannot, with this government, it cannot be business as usual, because these are extraordinary times. But notwithstanding, this is a budget for the people. Mr. Speaker, I said it earlier and I find it necessary to say again, no government in the history of the Bahamas would have spent directly on its people the amount this government has spent. And to be fair, in the same breath, no government in the history of the Bahamas have had to deal with 2 catastrophic events in one budget period. Mr. Speaker, these are the realities and the truth. These are the unprecedented times we find ourselves in. And now we therefore, and on that premise, submit an unprecedented budget. I dare say, though, a budget for the people. Mr. Speaker, budgeting, in essence, is how the numbers work to benefit the people. That's my perspective. I now turn briefly to the divisions, Mr. Speaker, or the departments under my remit. Division of Youth. Former U.S. President Barack Obama said it well when he substantially summed up the role of government, and I quote, "As a nation, we don't promise equal outcomes, but that everybody should have an equal opportunity to succeed. Mr. Speaker, that is fundamentally the philosophy that undergirds the work of the Division of Youth. No youth should be left behind, and it is our job to keep them connected with the knowledge, the tools, the people, and the resources that will ensure their best future. Mr. Speaker, this budget allocation will allow us to continue doing just that. In the face of COVID-19, the team of professionals at the Division of Youth, Mr. Speaker, led by Mistress Sandina Neely, demonstrated not only an ability, but a willingness to adapt in a crisis situation. Notwithstanding the emergency shutdown, the team quickly came together to develop, Mr. Speaker, online programs to keep the youth inspired, engaged, and to keep them patient. Mr. Speaker, COVID tried our patience. Some programs continued via virtual classroom, allowing the youth to stay connected and maintain a sense of togetherness, notwithstanding the distances between them. Mr. Speaker, the next poster shows a fraction of the work of the division within a typical 12-month period. Mr. Speaker, this is the Division of Youth. 12 months. Mr. Speaker, in coming to the ministry, may I add, one of the managers said, I have never seen a ministry like this. It's like an energizer. It keeps going and going. If anybody knows having to deal with youth, having to deal with the sporting community and the cultural community, you better come with energy and keep on going, Mr. Speaker. But they do a phenomenal job with the little they have, Mr. Speaker. The division manages multiple programs year-round for the benefit of our nation's youth demographic, age 15 through 24, and extends to the age of 30 in some instances. It also provides support for the 300 registered youth organizations throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, direct programs of the division include the National Youth Certification Course, Fresh Start Program for at-risk youth, Job Ready Program for the marginalized youth. Mr. Speaker, Youth Ambassadors Development Program for early bloomers, the Job Ready Program in particular are for those who need additional help to prepare themselves for the job market. Mr. Speaker, the challenges of youth are different than the challenges of sometimes older individuals, I may say. And so it is for the youth department to focus and zero in on those concerns or those disadvantages and provide opportunities. We have the Youth Ambassador Development Program for the early bloomers, the National Youth Summer Employment Job Experience Program. Mr. Speaker, last year we came in with 1,500. Deputy Prime Minister, you had us on a good train, on a good wicket. We were on our way. That is the most amount of children that were employed at any one period in the summer employment program. 1,500. Mr. Speaker, then we have the Youth Summer Camp, Be Inspired Mentor to Mentee program, the Self-Starter program for budding entrepreneurs in the youth category, and we recently launched the Train the Trainer program to keep our youth certified leaders on the cutting edge of best practices for youth leadership. Mr. Speaker, the highlight of the year is always the Youth Month activities. Mr. Speaker, in the month of October, includes the annual Youth March, the Youth Awards, Youth Parliament, the Band Encounter, Mr. Speaker, and if you leave it to the youth, the list will go on and on and on, Mr. Speaker. But growing out of COVID-19 environment, the Youth Division quickly adapted by embracing the use of technology, and that was important. Come the fall of 2020, a number of youth programs will be available via online instruction. Mr. Speaker, some programs such as Fresh Start Program, Job Ready, Youth Leader Certification, Mr. Speaker, will be launched online. Each year, these programs collectively touch the lives of approximately 500 persons who, upon successful completion, are equipped with national certification, strategic job experience, technical and vocational skills, as well as the tools and the knowledge to prepare them to contribute to society as productive, law-abiding citizens. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget has maintained 100% of our youth programming. This budget maintains, Mr. Speaker, 100% support to all of our partners, notwithstanding the 20% deduction in every area. Our partners remain a priority of this government, Mr. Speaker. We are not focused on having much and doing little, but doing much with what we have. May I say that again, Mr. Speaker? We are not focused in these austere times with the unprecedented challenges before us. We are not focused on having much to do little, but doing much with what we have. The goal of the division this year, Mr. Speaker, is to successfully launch as many of its programs online, and secondly, to enlist and train physically or via its online platform a sizable percentage of youth from the major family islands of the Bahamas, while ensuring access to those who are differently enabled. Mr. Speaker, I thank the youth, our youth department, our youth partners, and youth organizations for their continued cooperation. This is an extraordinary budget to account for extraordinary times, but this is and remains a budget for the people. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to sports. Jim Rohn says, and I quote, "Discipline is the foundation upon which all success is built, and the lack of discipline inevitably leads to failure," end quote. Mr. Speaker, it is my considered view that sport is that vehicle that drives discipline. And if we nurture it, sport is able to drive our people and economy to a more prosperous future. For the last 2 years, I've had the opportunity to observe and review the record. Persons whose life reflected the background in sports were able as teenagers to stay away from trouble, and as adults to apply good work ethics and team building skills. Mr. Speaker, sports, to my mind, being a former police officer, is a crime fighting tool waiting to be used. A sports-minded person is a disciplined individual, and a disciplined individual makes good for a productive and law-abiding citizen and society. Mr. Speaker, my point here is there are many ways and multiple things for our children to learn in addition to academics. And one of those avenues for learning alternative skills is acquiring a sports discipline. It is for us to consider what we allocate to sports programming in comparison to strictly academic programs. To my mind, Mr. Speaker, investing strategically in sports development through sports education and not merely sports activity is a thought worthy of conscious consideration. I think I'll say that again. It is for us to consider what we allocate to sports programming in comparison to strictly academic programs. To my mind, investing strategically in sports development through sports education and not merely sports activity is a thought worthy of conscious consideration. We are losing too many of our children to gangs and a life of violence, Mr. Speaker. Sport is a focused skill that has the ability to produce strategic results. According to a study published by Guardian Direct, organized sports can help your children build social, physical, and mental skills on and off the field. Additionally, sports keeps children and youth in particular positively engaged in clean fun. It also helps them to keep healthy and to keep active. Some attributes acquired through a sports program are trust, endurance, determination, sportsmanship, dependability, responsibility, self-discipline, and social skills development. Mr. Speaker, The Division of Sports has the responsibility to influence and facilitate the development of sport throughout the country, whether it be professional sport, recreational, educational, or organized sport. Team sports and individual sports all work together to build a well-rounded citizen and citizenry. I will be the first, Mr. Speaker, to admit that the sector requires more investment and room to grow. There has long been advocacy for a sports academy to give aspiring national, regional, and international world-class athletes the opportunity to build their skills and techniques in a strategic environment that simultaneously accommodates their academic learning. Bahamians possess raw talent in the area of sport. And if nurtured, we can produce more Bahamians who add value to our tourism product and international reputation. Mr. Speaker, we continue to build the same kinds of schools in hopes of obtaining different results. I trust that sooner rather than later, we realize the benefit in diversified learning, even as we require the building of a diversified economy and skill base. The Bahamas Vocational Training Institute, as it was in its inception, have trained and equipped hundreds of students who simply learn differently. This technical and vocational training and certification environment allowed us to produce some of the best electricians, plumbers, beauticians, nail techs, and now some of the best business savvy people in the Bahamas and around the world. Mr. Speaker, that different kind of school was working, and different kinds of schools can work and need to work for more reasons than one. Different kind of learning, different kind of environment to obtain different kind of results. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of such environments with a growing population, the reality is, and the growing population is in a small space. A very small space, Mr. Speaker, with over 70% and now post-Hurricane Dorian, perhaps 85% living right here on an island 7 by 21. Mr. Speaker, it is a lot for one island. But Mr. Speaker, we can manage this well if we diversify our economy, we diversify the skill base of our people. And one of those ways is to do it through sports. I believe it would become harder and harder under these conditions to build national teams such as our well-known Golden Girls, who celebrate their 20th anniversary this year. And more challenging, Mr. Speaker, it will be more challenging without some other source or some other avenue of learning and education. It will be more challenging to build another Golden Knight team, as we are losing our boys too quickly to drugs, the devices of gangs, and violence. Too quickly, Mr. Speaker. We must find alternatives. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be all academic. It cannot. Moreover, we must find a way to bring together the wealth and pool of talent we have right here, creating an environment for the structured transfer of sports knowledge. The coaches have been working, and the coaches are eagerly waiting. I believe, given the proper priority, it will happen. Mr. Speaker, I believe the Sports Academy will be a reality. It will be one of the schools that are built. Not every professional needs to sit behind a desk with a business suit and tie. Mr. Speaker, the National Sports Academy will harness the development of multiple sporting disciplines. The Academy would not merely be, as our department is, facilitating, but it will be regenerating. The Department of Sports, Mr. Speaker, is deficient in its pool of human resources, but nonetheless, the sports team led by Director Timothy Munning continues to carry the weight of sports. They do a phenomenal job overseeing, Mr. Speaker, the Boxing Commission, Anti-Doping Commission, monitoring the National Sports Authority, Mr. Speaker, ensuring collaboratively that sporting federations and sporting organizations remain compliant. Mr. Speaker, we oversee directly the National High School Track and Field Championships, Primary School Track and Field Championships, Bahamas Carifta Team Travel, and All-World Meet. Mr. Speaker, the department provides technical support for private events and guidance on all sports matters throughout the country. Mr. Speaker, this poster shows some of the work of that department, the Department of Sport, in one fiscal period. Mr. Speaker, we're responsible. I told you it's the people's ministry. We bring together hundreds and thousands within months. Department of Sport, Mr. Speaker, the evidence on the record is here. And we commend them. Mr. Speaker, sports consumes approximately, during this budget period, 15% of the ministry's budget, as shown in the first pie chart. This is the greatest share of the three departments within the ministry. The department ensures not only that we execute our mandate to facilitate the development of sports, but directly coordinate annual reward programs designed to give national recognition to the hard work and outstanding accomplishments of our athletes, former athletes, professionals, and organizations in the form of the National Sports Awards and Sports Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Mr. Speaker, we cannot be carried away by all of the noise in the market. This budget provides for all that we have done before, that we can continue to do it, and we will continue to do it and do it better. This is a budget for the people. Notwithstanding, it is unprecedented, and that is unrightfully so, because we are in unprecedented times, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful. I want to mention here for the partnership we continue to have also with all of the sports federations, as well as the Bahamas Olympic Committee, and to them for their continued support, cooperation, we say thank you. The Department of Sports, Mr. Speaker, in the last fiscal period provided direct and indirect financial assistance to 93 elite athletes in 11 sporting disciplines at an approximate cost of $1 million, Mr. Speaker. $1 million. And we will not waver in that commitment. Notwithstanding these unprecedented times, Mr. Speaker, sports remains a priority of this minister-led administration. Mr. Speaker, I hasten to add that a committee has been established led by Ms. Kim Roll, who is responsible for recommending policies for enhanced accountability of the subvention system. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to provide assistance for our athletes through their federations to successfully compete in regional and international meets. Mr. Speaker, this budget continues to prioritize athletes and sporting organizations. This is a budget for the people. Now, Mr. Speaker, some worthy mentions. We are proud of our Stephen Gardner and Shanae Miller-Weebu and the world champions team, who so ably represented the Bahamas, Stephen attaining a gold in the 400 meters and Shanae attaining the silver in the women's 200. Mr. Speaker, we understand some things are happening, and we'll be patient, Mr. Speaker, but we know good things come to those who wait, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, all medal athletes, in addition to Tania Gahill, we want to report, who qualified for the championships were rewarded their customary prize monies for their performances in the amount of $40,000, $30,000, and $5,000 respectively, in accordance with the established sports policy. They all received their monies, Minister of Finance. My good friend Dane and Grandson is here. I'm right here talking about what we are doing for the young people, what we are doing for youth, and what we are doing for culture. I told them, my friend, that though we are in unprecedented times, that requires we take unprecedented measures, you will find under this leadership of Dr. Hubert Minnis and the entire Free National Movement government. This is a government for the people. Mr. Speaker, as I wrap this up, we are immensely proud of our Bahamian-born and bred Shavano Buddy Hill, who in grand style, listen to this, won the end. Mr. Speaker, you were a former basketball player, so I know you're interested. But Mr. Speaker, Buddy Hill, I was watching on the television, and I jumped. Mr. Speaker, in grand style, he won the NBA three-point competition. Thereafter, Buddy, you're trying to stop smiling. But no doubt contributing to him landing a contract worth over $86 million for over a 4-year period. Mr. Speaker, Buddy continues to make us proud, and certainly he makes me proud to serve as the Minister of Sports during a time when he and as many of our athletes continue to break glass ceilings. Noteworthy, Mr. Speaker, every year, Buddy hosts the 27th Elite Basketball Clinic at the Kendall G.L. Isaacs Gymnasium and day sessions in Neighborhood Park. Mr. Speaker, Buddy assumes these expenses on his own. He holds camp every year. Mr. Speaker, and his sports acumen and community-mindedness speaks to the example of a sports superstar that our youngsters and athletes can emulate. He takes burden of the public purse, Mr. Speaker, when he runs a program like this of his own. We must invest more in sports to identify and groom more buddies who are more Shanays, who are value adders, more Stevens, who are value adders directly to the public purse, Mr. Speaker. And the Sports Academy can do just that. Currently, there are at least 20 Bahamian youngsters playing professional baseball in minor leagues, and another group who are benefiting through athletic scholarships at various colleges throughout the United States. So that means these athletes did not have to apply for any kind of scholarship or grant. Their athletic capabilities allowed them or gave them the opportunity to do it for themselves, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, worthy of mention is this young man. A lot of these people are from Grand Bahama, Mr. Speaker. You know, behind that mask, the Deputy Prime Minister is smiling. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Nathan Bain, Grand Bahamian and senior at Stephen F. Austin University in East Texas. He led his team in defeating the #1 ranked Duke University in a game of points 85-3 at the NCAA basketball showdown. This achievement, listen to this. Listen to the financial impact. This achievement sparked the attention of the world and sports news, ESPN, CNN, BCC, so much so that his story of world-class sports success from a native of a small island state attracted donations in excess of $100,000 to provide relief for his family who suffered devastation from Hurricane Dorian. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sports adds to the pot, the financial pot, and it adds in a tangible way. We must measure, Mr. Speaker, the value of sport to our overall fiscal performance. Buddy, Nathan, Shanae, Stephen are all testament to the fact that the money will come if we invest in the people. And this budget and this government has been and will continue to do just that. Mr. Speaker, the records are clear. This is an unprecedented budget for unprecedented times. But this is a budget for the people. Mr. Speaker, I now go to poster D, Mr. Speaker. South Beach Pool. Been down for some time, Mr. Speaker, but we are well on our way to bringing it to where it needs to be. I see, Mr. Speaker, my predecessor, Minister Pintar, he's looking with all smiles. Mr. Speaker, and we want to, thank you. This is another project of the ministry for which we are proud. We have suffered minor setbacks and further challenges were presented as a result of COVID-19. But Mr. Speaker, the final touches are being done with the safety of visitors as our priority. The facility has been dysfunctional for some time, but we are committed to seeing it to its full reopening for the residents of South Beach and the wider Bahamian community. It is expected that the facility will be operational come fall of 2020. Mr. Speaker, facilities of the National Sports Authority are in the process of being renovated. The Kendall GLI's gymnasium in particular, having suffered considerable damage to its use as a long-term shelter for the evacuees of Hurricane Dorian. I wish to take this time to commend the authority and its general manager, Mr. Quinton Brennan, for the exceptional hospitality they provided to those in need. Additionally, in relation to the baseball stadium presently under construction, I am advised that work, I want to be clear on that, the baseball stadium presently under construction, I am advised that work is steadily progressing and its proposed completion date is December 2020. Once again, Mr. Speaker, today, this government is not about talk, we're about action. Sure it is, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding unprecedented times, unprecedented budget, the Ministry of Work, the supervisor of this project, has advised this minister that we are expected to complete by December 2020. Thank you, sir. It's evidence. It's evidence. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we are not here to talk about woulda, shoulda, coulda. Mr. Speaker, we have moved beyond those sad stories. We said that it's going to be ready, God willing, Mr. Speaker, because these are unprecedented times. I'm not going to promise anyone anything. I always said that on the campaign trail. I don't promise nobody nothing. Mr. Speaker, qualified that statement, God willing. We look to be open, but what we have here is progress, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, the project to date, the cost of it comes in at $27,486,658. Mr. Speaker, I thank this government for its substantial investment in sport and in this facility that will help save many of our youth. An unprecedented set of funds, Mr. Speaker, over $27 million, and this is for sports. I want to say that again. I know that we want more funds. I know that we want a sports academy, and we're going to continue to push for it, but we must be grateful for what we have. $27 million this government has invested to bring that sports facility up to power for the boys to practice baseball and for us to produce more baseball stars. Mr. Speaker, those are the facts. In the unprecedented times, we still have a government that is working and a government that is working for the people. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to my final area, which is the division of culture. Every time I turn to these areas, everybody jumps because it touches and concerns everyone in here. Youth, oh, that's one of our children. Sports, we have several Olympians in here. Culture, better don't touch John Canoe. And so every time, Mr. Speaker, I have to be so careful because it is the people's ministry, and we have to keep our fingers on the pulse of the people. Culture's power to transform society is evident now more than ever. On the 22nd of April 2020, UNESCO hosted a virtual consultative meeting with 126 countries to examine the impact of COVID-19 on the creative arts industry. Culture ministers from around the world gathered in the virtual room to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the cultural sector. The virtual dialogue aims to secure information intended to help UNESCO support and track COVID's impact on its member states. In response to this call of action, the Division of Culture Affairs have embarked on a fact-finding mission across the archipelago of the Bahamas to create an expanded digital national creative arts registry. The creative cultural industry, better known as the CCI, which members include artists, artisans, musicians, entertainers, and all genre of performing art, depend on physical activity as musicians and artisans who, through their talent and creativity, lift tremendous financial burden from the government through their self-employment and ability to employ and contract others. They play a pivotal role in hiring and training others to develop a creative skill that maintains and promotes our native identity and island cultural philosophy. Mr. Speaker, like our athletes, many of our musical artists like Julian Thompson, well known as Julian Believe, other live bands such as Essence and artists such as Jody Minutes take the Bahamian culture around the world at no cost to the government. Free advertisement, Mr. Speaker, and these cultural artists return home with earned foreign revenue that adds to our U.S. foreign reserve. Mr. Speaker, as sports requires an academy, these artists require a state-of-the-art local performing arts theater for plays, Broadway shows, musical production, and a recording studio to encourage ingenuity and the development of today's musical icons. A performing arts school, Mr. Speaker, we spoke about doing things differently. A performing arts school is needed strategically to focus on strengthening our cultural identity and our cultural education, and our national identity. Such a school will allow us to identify those talented children like David Cox Jr., the little boy who sings all over the place and touches your heart, and in a structured way to educate and nurture with those who have exceptional creative art talents. Mr. Speaker, this is how we expand industry and economy through sound and strategic and diversified investment in our people. Mr. Speaker, diversity creates avenues for growth, and as a nation, we must add to our educational component and outlook. In other words, we must expand it. It cannot only be academics strictly. There are other ways and other things to learn. This is how we build strong and sustainable Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I am a firm believer that the only way to achieve a more resilient Bahamas is through investing in our people, our first and most valuable resource. I get sunshine and sea, but Mr. Speaker, it is nothing if you don't have that Bahamian cooking that peas and rice, if you don't have that Bahamian on that jet ski, allowing the visitors to have fun, if you don't have that Bahamian waiting the table, if you don't have the Bahamian fixing the bed, if you don't have the Bahamian managing the hotel, it means nothing. I want us to appreciate that. It means nothing. The first and most valuable resource of any country, any organization, it's not its money itself, it is its people. No money, no people, you don't need no money. Hello? Mr. Speaker, and this investment will lead to a greater state of self-sufficiency, diverse economy, and sovereign security, hidden in the rich heritage of our culture and our natural resources, beginning with our people. This classic yet novel approach may very well be the fuel we need to restore our competitive edge in a saturated world tourism market. And it may also be capable of powering the revenue-generating engines of our national economy. Mr. Speaker, indeed, a National Creative Arts Council could very well be the vehicle to bring structure, economic accountability, consistency, and stability to the creative arts sector and our country at large. While preserving, promoting, and facilitating the development of our cultural philosophy, the Division of Culture, led by Executive Director Rowena Poitier Sutherland, ensures the consistency of programs through the National Art Gallery, the National Junkanoo Parade, Junior Junkanoo Program, Mr. Speaker, during which 19 schools participated this year, the E. Clement Bethel National Arts Program, the National Christmas Tree Lighting. Mr. Speaker, the division consistently facilitates opportunities for artists to have platforms and stages to showcase their talents and develop their techniques and skills. Mr. Speaker, in the area of drama, I am most proud, listen to this, of the work of Therese Davis Nixon, better known as Miss Daisy. Then you want to laugh? You find Miss Daisy, talented, and the funny and culturally entertaining yet educational videos of Bahamian life and colloquialism and dialect showcased by Tamiko Sawyer, known as Sawyer Boy. Mr. Speaker, then you want to laugh. And then we have Latoya Dean of Grand Bahama, no smiling DPM, of Grand Bahama in her famous videos, Laughs by Latoya. Mr. Speaker, don't let Latoya could make you laugh. Mr. Speaker, between Miss Daisy, Sawyer Boy, and Latoya laugh, Mr. Speaker, I don't know who, Mr. Speaker, are the funniest. They are just outdoing me and outdoing everybody. They are talented individuals, and we need to be able to laugh, not sometimes, many times. As a matter of fact, I don't want to preach, Pastor over there, but they say it's good for the soul, Mr. Speaker, and sometimes we need to laugh in here. Perhaps, Mr. Speaker, I don't know, this is a serious place, but you may need to call Daisy or Sawyer or Latoya sometime and it get hot. Mr. Speaker, the Division of Culture has unfortunately experienced, however, now some challenges this year. The National Dance School is in the process of being relocated and revived. That school survived 30 years and it has an enrollment of 600 students, and so we are focused, Mr. Speaker, on ensuring that we revive that program and that institution, Mr. Speaker. We understand the importance of transfer of knowledge and transition, Mr. Speaker, of skill and talent and information, Mr. Speaker, and so we will do just that. Secondly, the E. Clement Bethel program was stopped abruptly due to COVID-19, as well as the Junior Junkanoo program. Once again, Mr. Speaker, it was out of our hands, unprecedented times, Mr. Speaker, which calls for now unprecedented measures. We had to stop it to keep everyone safe and ask them to stay at home, Mr. Speaker. And we're now here with an unprecedented budget, yet for the people looking to restore where we can. Mr. Speaker, the feeling world over is that COVID had snatched, I'll say, it away. What is it? How we interact, how we dance, how we play, how we learn, how we worship, how we work, and the list goes on. That's how we feel. Everyone feels it, that COVID had snatched it away, Mr. Speaker. But we will defeat COVID, for we have a heritage and a legacy and a culture, a strong culture that is, that precedes us. Regarding the annual Junkanoo Parades, Mr. Speaker, the ministry has met initially with sector stakeholders. As soon as the emergency powers are lifted, we intend to conduct a follow-up meeting with that body to determine the best course of action for this year's parade. Mr. Speaker, with all good intention to host the parades, the appropriate allocation is available in this year's budget to provide our annual subvention and augment parade expenses. Mr. Speaker, we will be guided by the health officials and monitor World Health guidelines to uphold this government's priority, which is to keep the Bahamian people safe. Mr. Speaker, this unprecedented budget during these unprecedented times still provides 100% of our programming and grants to our cultural organizations and partners, Mr. Speaker, albeit with our 20% deduction as required. The Division of Culture accepts the fact that these are unprecedented times, yet whatever the circumstances, this budget and the government of the Bahamas will continue to invest in the development of our culture, and we will continue to invest in our people. Penultimately, Mr. Speaker, many parents are calling about the ministry's summer employment and summer camp programs. Good news staying in Grandstown. Mr. Speaker, I am sure all appreciate that we are in an unusual environment, and therefore it cannot be business as usual. That being said, we understand that the youth have been virtually locked down approximately 4 months. We get it. And at some point, too much energy in the balloon will cause it to burst. We get it. I am pleased to report that under the guidance of the Ministry of Health, we are planning to host our 4-week summer programs commencing the 27th of July to the 21st of August. We also continue to monitor guidance by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Mr. Speaker, for best practices of reopening youth sports and cultural sector and activities. In this COVID-19 environment, our programs will be guided by and subject to the advice from the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 guidelines. In collaboration with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture is preparing and finalizing a list of COVID-19 guidelines for the benefit of youth organizations, sports federations, and organizations. Mr. Speaker, we realize that we have to face COVID head on. We have to do it safely. We have to do it in a smart manner. We have to do it, Mr. Speaker, understanding the protocols and appreciating where we are. But the sooner we get up and fight, the better. Mr. Speaker, as well as we are preparing guidelines of recommendation for the creative arts community. Mr. Speaker, for the record, we emphasize that until we are clear of the state of emergency, particular contact sports and related facilities should not be conducted or opened in the absence of health guidance. The official guidance document will be available on Monday, the 15th of June, 2020, and can be viewed via the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture's port on the government's website or the ministry's Facebook page. Mr. Speaker, I cannot close without turning to the good sea breeze. Mr. Speaker, I'm wrapping it up. I'm wrapping it up. I'm cutting it short today, Mr. Speaker. I'm cutting it short today. But Mr. Speaker, I could not have been here had it not been for the good people of Seabreeze who came out and voted, Mr. Speaker, overwhelmingly for this member and this government. Mr. Speaker, 12 polling divisions, and I love them all. I want to commend the residents of Seabreeze for cooperating with the National COVID-19 Coordinating Office, whose efforts have successfully mitigated against the spread of the COVID-19 disease in our communities. Mr. Speaker, I want Seabreeze.
Do not be tempted.
I would also like to thank the Seabreeze team that labored tirelessly to ensure the safe door delivery of over 300 care bags, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Speaker. This is culture. This is culture.
$50 now.
Mr. Speaker, Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to repeat, Mr. Speaker, that none of these programs have been cut. So I said, Mr. Speaker, whenever you hear people, Mr. Speaker, saying things that are negative, it's just pure rhetoric. It's propaganda. And once again, it has no place in a post-modern Bahamian society. Mr. Speaker, in terms of comedians, we can't forget Mr. Speaker Will Stubbs and Jaquel, Mr. Speaker Jared. George. Oh, Mr. Speaker, that's our WNBA lady. Mr. Speaker, these people are breaking glass ceilings, Mr. Speaker, and this is what youth sports and culture is all about. But we realize that we are in different times, and so we have to take different approaches. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank Seabreeze team that labored, and Mr. Speaker, this is important. Seabreeze, I hope you're listening. We labored for you. We labored with you from day one. Tirelessly, we ensured safe door delivery. I told them we cannot do the lines. We couldn't do the lines. My team, they worked safely with members of finance, and they we-delivered over 300 care packages to the doors of our residents in Seabreeze. We don't talk this thing, man. Not only the care bags, but for those who preferred, we distributed vouchers as well, Mr. Speaker, to our persons and our residents in need. I am thankful to have had the opportunity to deliver some of these items personally to the constituents. Mr. Speaker, I am more about action. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Seabreeze, my team and I have been consistent in the community, engaged in ongoing community building programs and initiatives, including our annual summer camps, back to school and Christmas giveaways, to name a few. Just before COVID, this year we held our first annual prayer breakfast, Mr. Speaker, on Joe Farrington Road. Thanks to the Ministry of Works, Water and Sewage, BPL, Ministry of Environment, Mr. Speaker, that's the Minister for Marathon, Member of Parliament for Marathon, who always assists me. Capital developments, including parks, upgrades, cleaning of verges, Mr. Speaker, removal of derelict vehicles, in addition to water and sewage upgrades, speed bump installation, and much more continued Seabreeze through you, Mr. Speaker, from day one. Mr. Speaker, my representation and the representation of the team that supports me is not all about a show. And so, Mr. Speaker, we realize that we're here for the good times and the bad times. So you will not hear, it is not our record that only during this time or that time you're going to see us pop up. I don't do the popping thing, Mr. Speaker. This is serious business. The Seabreeze team appreciates and understands that this member means business. We are consistent, and my team is committed, because I believe that the people of Seabreeze, yea, the people of the Bahamas, they want members of Parliament who are committed, Mr. Speaker. And throughout the term, not just popping here and popping there, Mr. Speaker, I know the member, Mr. Speaker, of West End and Bimini. She has been working from day one. Mr. Speaker, the member for Fox Hill has been working from day one. The member from Michael has been working from day one. Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze has been working from day one. There's too much men to call. All the rest of me. 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 I'm not going to fall into that trap. I got to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap this up.
Honorable member for Charlotte, I heard a little gender bias in that presentation.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding we have a minister responsible for gender and family affairs, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the good Rodney Moncase is the leader of the Woman Dam, Mr. Speaker, I am female and I will represent without apology. As I conclude, Mr. Speaker, our goal from day one was to build a better sea breeze. And we will continue to do this through stable, steady, and sound leadership. I thank my family for their continued support to this sacrifice to country and commend this government for keeping our nation, our economy, and our people stable, steady, and focused on building a new and better Bahamas. While we can accept that much has changed from the last budget to now, and that COVID has deprived us of many things, one Tremaine Hawkins sang, and I quote, "I never lost my hope. I never lost my joy. I never lost my faith. And I never lost my praise." Mr. Speaker, Shirley Caesar gave a strong response that can resonate with those of the Christian faith in any crisis. And she sang, "This joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me, and the world can't take it away." Mr. Speaker, this indeed is an unprecedented budget for unprecedented times. And this 2020-2021 draft estimates of revenue and expenditure, I submit, is a budget for the people, Mr. Speaker, and this is a budget that Seabreeze supports. I want to leave this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, I want to leave this final statement that has inspired me, Mr. Speaker, from Psalms 33 and verse 9. In these very serious times where we continue to see unprecedented natural disasters, Mr. Speaker, where we continue to see unprecedented challenges. King David said it very well in Psalms 33 and verse 9 when he said, "He spake, and it was done." Listen to this, people of the Bahamas. He commanded, and it stood fast. Mr. Speaker, Seabreeze supports the 2020-2021 budget.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today humbled but grateful to represent the tremendous people of Elizabeth. Over the last 3 years, I've had the opportunity, because of them, not just to serve in this place, but I've had the honor and the privilege to serve the people of the Bahamas as the Minister of Health. That tenure has ended, and I have begun my time as a backbencher. I intend to bring the same level of commitment to this role as I did to the one that I held previously. We enjoy a democracy with 3 branches of government. The Parliament, in which we serve, ought to function independently, with critical review of the proposals of the executive. As a backbencher, it is expected and it is required that I speak truth to power. This is the role envisioned in the Westminster system, and I pledge today that I shall do exactly that. To my colleagues who serve in Cabinet, I've appreciated the camaraderie and the collaboration in our efforts at nation building. We didn't always get it right, but we certainly tried to, and I wish you well. I have been very fortunate, Mr. Speaker, to develop and maintain a unique set of skills that I intend to use for the benefit of the people of this country. All of the people of this country. So you will find me less often in a suit and tie and more commonly in scrubs. So at least for a season, I shall focus on solving the clinical problems common to that profession, which are unfortunately far too prevalent in this country. Gunshot wounds and stabbings, heart disease, kidney disease, and cancer, and working to serve the needs of the people of Elizabeth, the resilient, hard-working, and honorable people of Elizabeth. Now, many have asked, what's in store for Dwayne Sands now in politics? My response is simple. I will rule nothing out at this time. But I am reminded by Psalm 37:23 that the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. Mr. Speaker, I cannot do this without the tremendous support of my wife and my family. And I want to say publicly how much I appreciate the tremendous support that I've gotten from my immediate family, especially my wife, and my extended family and friends. I have a phenomenal team in Elizabeth. Together we have fed the hungry through our soup kitchens, and now with our food bank, we have distributed over 7,000 bags of groceries since January 2020. And let me thank our donors for their support. We have moved derelict and abandoned vehicles. We've cleaned up our community, beautified our parks. We've trimmed overgrown brush, and we've bulldozed dangerously overgrown property. We hosted the kids to summer camps. Most importantly, we rekindled a spirit of community. Elizabeth is open for business. And I must thank my entire executive team headed by Pamela Hart. It has truly been a fantastic voyage. I also wish to thank, Mr. Speaker, the entire staff of the Ministry of Health. I enjoyed and appreciated their advice and their support. My daily duties as minister could not be completed without the able assistance of far too many people to mention by name on this occasion. But let me commit the sin and single out my personal assistant, Sharon Taylor, and Jeanette Bowles, my driver and assistant, Lamont Knowles, and the magician, Xavier Knowles, a young man with exceptional skills and talent. And throughout my tenure at the ministry, I benefited from the technical guidance of many capable professionals. I wish to thank the board of directors of the PHA, the executive, and the entire staff of the PHA hospitals, Princess Margaret, Sandilands, and Naran, and those of the Department of Public Health. All the chairs and members of medical boards who answered the call to national service. I can't list you by name, but I appreciate you. It has been a privilege to stand with you on this most important battleground. Much has been accomplished together. It was a challenge, a battle, but we were able to squeeze out progress and hope out of decades of despair. Mr. Speaker, let me highlight a few of the accomplishments of this team working in this administration. We expanded the footprint of the Agape House. We renovated the Corey Newbold Ward, now called the Med Surgical Ward. We created a new business office. We repaired the roof of Princess Margaret Hospital damaged by hurricane. We refurbished the dialysis unit. We outfitted EMS with state-of-the-art equipment and new ambulances. We put brand new CAT scanners in both Princess Margaret Hospital and Naran. We introduced a new PAC system for X-ray, new beds for the hospital, renovated the labor ward. We've been continuing work in the community clinics in Cat Island, in Inagua, in Crooked Island. The NHIA implemented its electronic medical records, and they now boast of more than 60,000 satisfied patients receiving primary care. We improved the contracts and conditions of service for junior doctors and nurses. We paid outstanding monies to nurses. We recognized for the first time the Consultant Physicians Staff Association, or their consultants union. We now have an ambulance in North Abaco. The emergency flight and triage process was reviewed and improved. We expanded the testing menu at our National Reference Lab, including the ability for the first time to test for arboviruses and COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, on the international front and in public health, we drafted a policy framework for the National Ethics Oversight Body. We created a match program for junior doctors. We completed the breadbasket review. We established a marijuana commission. The STEP survey for 2019 was executed. We have completed the revision of the dental bill, the nurses and midwives bill. We launched a hugely successful cooking program called What You Cooking. We adopted a policy to ban sugary beverages at all Ministry of Health facilities. We raised awareness on climate change. We established modular facilities in New Providence and Grand Bahama to manage COVID-19 patients. We've had ongoing engagement with international donors. And over the last 2 years, the Bahamas has been privileged to serve as both president of the Directing Council of the Pan American Health Organization and as president of the World Health Assembly this year. Now, Mr. Speaker, Rahm Emanuel was wrongly credited with the statement, "Don't waste a crisis." The originator of that term was Sir Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who led the free world through its darkest hours during World War II. And he said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And those words are prescient. We find ourselves most certainly in the midst of a national crisis. A crisis that has rocked not only us, but the world to its core. Trillions of dollars of value have been wiped from the balance sheets of countries. And the IMF describes the current state of the world economy as the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. The U.S. is in recession. China is at risk for recession, and we most certainly will be as well. And as we stare at a post-Dorian existence, still in a climate change reality, as we ponder that we live in a COVID-19 still raging world, and we live in the middle of the cauldron, we can scream, we can shout, we can wail. Or, Mr. Speaker, we can come out swinging. Budgets are about choices. They always have been. They always will be. There is seldom ever a time when there is enough revenue to do everything that we want, or even to pay for the things that we must. This year we are forecasting a deficit of $1.3 billion. That is, provided we don't have another catastrophic storm, a continuation of this pandemic, or one like it, or if we suffer deeper collateral damage from the fallout of recessions that are taking place in every G20 country. So pick a metaphor. At the edge of the cliff, at the end of the road, at a crossroad, a do-or-die situation, bend or break, pick one. We are there now. You add to that a national debt just shy of $9 billion. And all of us, all 39 of us, are here for such a time as this. Our people are looking on afraid, Mr. Speaker. Many are saying that they can't breathe because of the financial pressure. the challenge of feeding or educating their kids or themselves. We have historic levels of underemployment or unemployment. Businesses are stressed. Business owners are stressed. What then do? We have to make choices. And our strategy has to be bold. Some might say daring, but not reckless. It will demand teamwork and partisan across the aisle cooperation. The people want programs and policies, not promises. Programs and policies that will lead to economic growth. Now is the time for disruptive thinking. We must define this country, this Bahamas, as the preferred destination, not just in the region, but in the world, for commerce, for leisure, and revitalization. Simultaneously, we must embrace alternative methods of sustaining and growing our economy, inclusive of medical tourism, exploiting our unique geographic location, strong democracy, and parity with the US dollar. Repositioning our financial services sector to recapture captive insurance and reinsurance. Encouraging the growth of Grand Bahama as a regional hub for multinational corporations. Establish a robust hemp farming and manufacturing industry. We have to develop a strong service sector in IT. Perhaps position the Bahamas as a transportation hub for the Americas. With no apologies, no self-doubts, no buts, no what-ifs, no maybes. Failure is not an option. Never waste a crisis. Now, Mr. Speaker, in the first week of September 2020, the world changed. On September the 1st, 2020, Hurricane Dorian began its path of destruction. 2019. It began its path of destruction across the northern Bahamas. And we experienced hell on earth, particularly in Abaco and Grand Bahama. The residents of those islands continue to live the aftermath of Dorian daily. We all recognize that recovery would not happen quickly, but few were prepared for the actual slow road back to even a semblance of normalcy. Now, Mr. Speaker, we did not handle the identification of those who lost their lives or the missing very well. The official death toll of Dorian stands at 74, but the actual death toll and reconciliation of missing persons remains unknown. Many families continue to grieve not only for the loss of loved ones, but for the uncertainty of what has become of their remains. And while the majority of Bahamians have returned to their ordinary lives following the storm, many from Grand Bahama and Abaco continue in states of suspended animation. We must empathize with them because they have certainly had their lives shattered. As of today, we do not know collectively who is lost, who's missing, or missing and presumed dead. I fear that we have not sufficiently elevated this matter as a national priority. There was too little focused attention and management of the issue of missing and deceased persons. You see, responsibility was spread over multiple ministries and government agencies. It was believed that this would ensure greater clarity, but in action, it proved to be a recipe for disaster. For us to close this chapter before another is opened, and bear in mind we are 2 weeks into hurricane season, let us look objectively and honestly at our approach to missing persons and deceased persons. Let us dissect the process used to arrive at the official count of 33, even as many more families mourn missing persons. You know, we started with a list of several thousand persons missing. That list was managed by the Ministry of Social Services. We ended with a missing persons list controlled by the RBDF that included less names than the number of unidentified persons that we buried. To this day, We do not know what happened that caused thousands or hundreds of names to be excluded from that official list. Now, there may be justifiable, reasonable reasons for pruning the list, but those reasons and that process have not been shared and explained to the public. Because of that process, we have raised many questions and squandered credibility. People want to know why we have no DNA matches for those persons recently buried. The public deserves to know how many samples were taken, how many times were those samples taken, where were they tested and by whom. Why is there no publicly accessible listing or database of missing persons? What are the names of the people lost? The mothers, the fathers, the children. If we are to get closure as a country, we must accept the loss, outline the process used, admit our missteps, and operationalize systems to do better. Perhaps this is simply because we continue to exist in an environment where information is not shared with the public freely, openly, and frequently. Winston Churchill said, "Never waste a crisis." Now we must demonstrate why we are transparent and open to scrutiny and criticism. Dorian has taught us that while we all suffer, the most vulnerable, the least powerful, the least connected suffer the most. That suffering is deep, and the scarring goes beyond the bone all the way to the soul. In the Bahamas, our population of undocumented migrants have paid a premium with possessions lost, loved ones lost, and we have not consistently assured them that they would be afforded safe spaces to interact with government agencies. We have not completed the grieving from Dorian because that incomplete grieving was interrupted by a greater trauma called COVID-19. But that grieving debt will have to be paid. And we either pay it now or we will pay it later. Let us agree to convene the coroner's inquests to bring closure to these grieving families. Identify and empower a single empathetic team. Separate the process from the specter of immigration intervention. Start a public conversation. And then let us apologize for getting it wrong the first time. This budget should reflect the level of psychological services needed to mitigate the pain and suffering. In its current form, I do not believe that it adequately strengthens community psychological services, incorporates partnerships with the private sector for improved access to such services, or incorporates a programmatic approach 60 to the Dorian COVID trauma inclusive of gender-based violence, child abuse, and substance abuse. Never waste a crisis. The evidence suggests that climate change is real, Mr. Speaker. Superstorms are likely going to be with us until we, as a planet, change our collective way. The odds say that one of the named storms of this Atlantic 2020 season will impact some part or parts of our archipelago. That reality we cannot change. What we can do is twofold. To become a vocal advocate for small island developing states, to identify and source real funding for building resilience inclusive of mangrove restoration and programmatic conversion to renewable energy. And secondly, to improve our preparedness to face the worst which climate change can exact upon us. Yes, we must hope. And yes, we must pray. But hope and prayer are not effective fiscal strategies. The time for study is past. The Bahamas must embrace renewable energy as a matter of policy. We cannot afford any other approach. Reliance on fossil fuels limits our moral authority to criticize the rest of the world who have larger carbon footprints. We have loads of sun. Let's use it. The double whammy of COVID-19 and Dorian have come with a peculiar conundrum for us. How do we put persons in shelters and at the same time limit the transmission of viruses like COVID-19? So this year, we must do things differently and plan for sheltering differently across the Bahamas. And we must make sure that our shelters are conducive to social distancing but still provide safety. We are in uncharted waters. I turn now to COVID-19, Mr. Speaker. As of June the 10th, 2020, more than 416,000 people have died from this new virus. According to my alma mater, Johns Hopkins, there are more than 7.4 million confirmed infections. And there are likely many more than that because many persons, particularly those with mild expressions, but meeting the case definition of the disease, are never tested. And that is also true in the Bahamas. Some persons are simply advised to isolate themselves for 14 days. And this approach, used here as well, is commonly used internationally, including in G7 countries. As a matter of strategy and philosophy, some people are not tested. Some countries lack the resources to test. No country knows for certain the total number of persons infected. Instead, we use a surrogate, the number of persons with positive molecular tests for COVID-19. But 6 months after the discovery of this novel coronavirus, our world has been turned upside down. We have lost 11 souls to this virus, and 103 people have been confirmed to be infected. Now, I want to say congratulations to the Bahamian people, to all the agencies, to the Customs, Police, Immigration, Port Authority, Defense Force, Tourism, and other government agencies who started to plan the Bahamas' response in mid-January 2020. All of you should be proud of what you have accomplished. We have weathered the storm thus far. Permit me to single out healthcare workers. You have borne incalculable risk. And you have carried a disproportionate share of the burden. Some of you have been the tip of the spear. You have demonstrated a level of selflessness that defined the healing arts of medicine and nursing. But there have also been shopkeepers, bank and grocery store workers, food handlers, armed force officers. I am so proud of all of you. Through it all, you have been steadfast, true, and direct. You have won and deserved the trust of the people of this great country. Now, I spent several months working with the EOC of the Ministry of Health prior to my resignation on May the 4th. The EOC was chaired by Dr. Dal Regis, who reported to the competent authority, and it had a core team who met and who still meet daily for hours. This team operationalized the national response, generated data, tested, interpreted, and reported to the Bahamian public. Now let me say something about Dr. Dal Regis. 21 years ago, when she served as the nation's chief medical officer, she identified a young cardiovascular surgeon and coaxed him to dabble in an area that is the exact opposite of what he does or did every day. Made it possible for him to travel to Geneva to attend the World Health Assembly in 1999. And that immersion resulted in an appreciation of the important role that the public health department plays in the life of our people. And when that cardiovascular surgeon returned as minister in 2017, Dr. Dal Regis continued to mentor him, assisting the Ministry of Health and the new CMO to a level of standing in the international health arena. It is largely due to her guidance that the Bahamas was elected to chair PAHO in 2019 and to assume the presidency of the WHO in 2020. This was the World Health Assembly of the WHO. This was an unprecedented honor for this tiny country. And she is truly a national hero, and I am grateful for her leadership, mentorship, and patriotism. But, Mr. Speaker, the unsung heroes are the ordinary men and women who surrendered their liberty for the greater good. With a few exceptions, Bahamians have adapted to a new normal of masks, lines, absent barbers and hairdressers, limited personal interaction, canceled weddings and funerals. Loved ones have died alone. Babies have been born without partners. People have undergone surgery alone. Now, there's no possibility that we can remain closed forever. As we move to liberalize intra-island commerce and activities, as we seek to reopen to international visitors and invite cruise ships and aircraft back to the Bahamas, I stand here to say, caution. Yes, open, but do it carefully. Let us look at the experience of nations around us who took a less considered approach. The WHO says, and I quote, "The diagnostic testing for COVID-19 is critical to tracking the virus, understanding epidemiology, informing case management, and in suppressing transmission." The Bahamas reported its first COVID-19 confirmed case on March the 15th, 2020. And since then, as I've said, we've had 103 cases in total. And we've had a series of challenges with testing capacity. But as of June the 7th, 2020, we tested at a rate less than 122 other countries in the world, and we are well behind comparable countries in the region. Testing for COVID-19 is complex. I recognize and applaud the pivotal role played by our national lab, led by Dr. Indira Martin, the daughter of the Honorable Member for Engliston. They've gotten it right. But, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas has been challenged with every step of this process: swabs, RNA extraction kits, lab reagents, and RT-PCR kits. And as a result, we have not been able to test as widely as we wish to or needed to test. A number of persons who met the clinical case definitions for COVID-19 could not be tested and were not tested. Now, our geography has long been a benefit and a challenge to our development. The threat from COVID is only the newest expression of a challenge that places us between the United States, with the largest number of COVID-19 cases in the world, which is increasing, and related deaths, and countries in the region like Haiti and others in Latin America like Brazil, where the spread of the disease is rampant and the ability to test is inadequate. Early in 2020, when we asked if we would have a case of novel coronavirus, we said it was not a matter of if, but when. But we mounted a response, and we weathered the first wave of the assault. We got used to lockdowns, masks, social distancing, and now we await with great anticipation the restoration of normalcy and the resumption of commerce. Yes, we must reopen, but let me say it categorically: without a robust, consistent ability to test and definitively screen, isolate, and track, if we take our eye off the ball and lessen our vigilance, we can and we should expect a second wave of COVID-19 in the Bahamas. If that happens, I dread even considering the potential economic peril. Never waste a crisis, Mr. Speaker. I do not support a policy of open borders to untested individuals, especially if most of these people travel from those locales known to have a high prevalence of COVID-19. Those that come legally from a high incidence country. Yes, we need to restore our economy, but we cannot play Russian roulette. Many of us hope and pray, me included, that the worst is behind us. Yes, we should open, but we must do so deliberately, cautiously, and carefully, and we should do so with data. I do not support a policy that requires Bahamian citizens and residents to be tested that does not place the same level of scrutiny on visitors. If we test any, we test all. And we must test more than we're doing now. That said, if we open and we test, even if we move heaven and earth, and we must move heaven and earth to build the capacity. There are pundits and naysayers that say, open, the virus is weakening, the pandemic is over. Ronald Reagan said it well when he said, trust but verify. We don't have to be passive. Let's define the best practice scenario, operationalize it, and do it in partnership with the private sector. Let us define the Bahamas as a COVID-safe destination. Bahamas tests, Bahamas tracks, Bahamas traces. Even as we pivot to diversify the economy, let us do tourism better than anybody else. Let me say directly to you, Freetown, we must do it better. You see, the data that you know quite well suggests that many are hoping for a sun, sand, and sea vacation. But they also want to be safe. Is their housekeeper, the maitre d', the taxi driver, or hair braider COVID-19 safe? We can't leave this up to chance. Let us write the book on a COVID-free vacation destination, but have the data to prove it. Let us create a local industry which tests constantly and maintains a secure but robust database of persons who have valid COVID checks. I could say more about this, but in the interest of time, let me move on. Mr. Speaker, my time as Minister of Health was always viewed as a privilege. There was never a dull day. Loads of reading, meetings, problems to solve, budgets, bills, choices, complaints. Having left an operating room with gunshots, broken hearts, and sick people, I anticipated before I started that my role would not be as compelling or challenging or exciting. I stand here to say today, Mr. Speaker, I was wrong. There was never a dull moment, and I appreciated the opportunity to serve. My biggest regret is that we didn't accomplish more. Let me speak about nurses. They continue to labor in our healthcare facilities without the recognition and tangible compensation that they deserve. Now, we've made some headway as a country, but we will have to continue the effort to reposition nursing relative to all the other professions. We cannot afford any approach that is less than disruptive and intentional. And I hope that now that I don't have to stand off with the union, that nurses can realize that I was their biggest advocate. We have an unfinished mess with the career development of physicians. The journey to right-size our approach to physician training demands focused attention to the careers of each young person chosen and a vision for the needs and the growth of the entire Bahamas. The process of physician training starts with an excellent student with the social skills appropriate for the vocation. Medical training should be viewed as a continuum of medical school, whether you have a first degree or not, followed by time-restricted postgraduate education in various disciplines, inclusive of public health, epidemiology, family medicine, internal medicine and specialties, psychiatry, transplant medicine, surgery, etc. We currently have a system in the Bahamas, a pyramidal system, that does not assure support or opportunity for many doctors to complete their training at a level that allows them to compete equally with their peers around the world. And many have grown frustrated at a national system that is under-resourced, under-equipped, and generally outdated. You see, when given the opportunity for training, Bahamians excel. But sadly, even as we've spent millions of dollars annually, we have created a bloated system, overwhelmed with frustrated Bahamians yearning for a chance to reach their professional potential. This budget, we should expand the pool of physician educators, create simulation facilities for achieving procedural competence, and ensure that our teaching hospitals are a mixture of service, research, and training, staffed by full-time clinicians. Let us define the number of physicians that we will support for medical school until completion of their specialty or subspecialty training. Let's define that number and stick to it. I want to speak now very briefly about our institutions. Princess Margaret, I love that facility. I love that hospital and the people. But we have run that Model T, which was designed to travel, these are words of Robin Roberts, designed to travel at no more than 20 miles per hour. We've been running it at 50 miles an hour, all day, all night, and to use a famous slogan, 24/7, 365. Mr. Speaker, there's only so much paint and putty in the world. We need impactful capital works. And I would like to make a suggestion through you to the executive. In Grand Bahama, Dorian devastated the Rand Memorial Hospital, and the necessary repairs are ongoing. But we must identify an appropriate site, define the services needed, inclusive of cancer care, cardiac care, proper psychological and psychiatric services, and the facility must be designed and built to be climate resilient and green. In Nassau, we have worked at advancing proposals for design and PPP initiatives to build the next tower on PMH, inclusive of a brand new accident emergency, imaging tower, and maternal child health. Yes, and multi-tiered parking structures. The proposals and costings at the Ministry of Health are already reviewed by the PHA board. Both projects can be completed for less than $500 million. Public-private partnership. This can jumpstart our economic activity, initially off balance sheet. Never waste a crisis. If we are going to solve the problems of healthcare and healthcare training opportunities for young physicians, let us resolve the endless problem of overcrowding with initiatives such as this. And while we're at it, let's finally get that National Blood Bank, Forensic and Medical Examiners Lab, and a National Reference Lab that unfortunately I didn't get to complete. I look with interest at the allocation given to the PHA. And while there appears to be a nominal increase, there will continue to be underfunding of critical maintenance needs. Of concern is the mismatch of funding for outsourced services such as cancer care, dialysis, and radiation. There's no questioning the demand due to unacceptably high levels of NCDs and the development of heart disease, kidney failure requiring dialysis, and cancer. Yes, the demand is high for these services. The cost is tremendous. But reducing the allocation for contracted services in the absence of an alternative will mean that people will be denied life-saving care. So who's going to decide? We envision the requirements to create panels of community experts, pastors, and social scientists to make the gut-wrenching determination of who gets access to what expensive services. Will the panels empowered to ration services decide based on age, social value, color, or ideology? Even as we have appropriately budgeted to strengthen NHI, and I certainly applaud the executive, let us recall the promise made to introduce coverage for catastrophic illnesses. A proposal has been forwarded by the NHIA. It is thoughtful and progressive and will require collaboration with the insurance and business industry. Let us revisit the breadbasket review and remove more unhealthy items and put more fruits and vegetables. And Cat Island, I want to get rid of your corned beef.
No.
It is an initiative like the sugar sweetened beverage initiative that needs to go further. Mr. Speaker, we are living in interesting times. We can only walk this road if it leads to progress. And as I conclude, I pondered, what advice should I give? And I decided that maybe I'll just leave you with a poem. It's written by Robert Frost. It says, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Mr. Speaker, never waste a crisis. We are truly in interesting times. I commit to support the people of this country to the best of my ability, and Elizabeth will certainly support this budget of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Garden Hills. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, this is a ample point for us to be able to break for lunch. So, Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. today.
Honourable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favour will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. It is ordered that the business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.